Welcome to the Executive Innovation Show podcast, where we bring you real executive conversations with industry game changers and thought leaders. We ask the questions you're thinking, what you're scared to ask, and we make your brain hurt afterward. With your host, Carrie Chitsey Wells, co-founder and CEO of One Touch Video Chat, live video interviews, and the nonprofit Humans Helping Humans.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's podcast. We have a great HR podcast today where we're going to be talking about retention and attrition, and it is not an afterthought, brought to you by Live Video Interviews, this segment. Our first guest on the show is Brad Goldoor, who's the co-founder and chief people officer at PhenomPeople, where he oversees their signature not normal hiring, onboarding, and employee engagement initiatives. He also specializes in startups, has over 25 years experience in channel sales, digital advertising, and people operations. Later in the show, we're going to be talking to John Reaves Whitaker, who's the VP of Talent Acquisition and Retention at Dental One Partners. He's often featured on the Fistful of Talent and the HR Exchange Network and is actively working on his next book, We Are All Millennials. Brad, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Well, awesome. I want to talk a little bit. A lot of our HR folks, are very familiar with applicant tracking systems, but you guys are kind of much different from that. Tell me a little bit why you started Phenom and what exactly is talent experience management versus ATS?
Sure. So we originally started PhenomPeople to solve the candidate experience problem. And about 10 years ago, we started making mobile optimized career sites to sort of fix the mobile adoption problem that a lot of the ATSs and candidates were having. And so we've now taken and expanded that platform to include all the modern artificial intelligence, and think of experiences like Spotify and Netflix and Amazon. So we're taking and infusing intelligence into all the experiences on our platform around talent. And that starts with the candidate, and then it goes to the recruiters, the managers, and the employee. And so we're creating these automated, intelligent experiences around all of those functions of the talent stakeholders, and really bringing that into the consumer-like experience that people expect on the sites that I mentioned.
That's awesome. And, talking about experience, I want you to share with everybody about your kind of new employees' first day experience, what you guys are doing with kind of the videos and family and so forth is really different than I've ever heard before. And I think that, as this podcast, we talk about, retention and attrition, you guys are prioritizing and saying, hey, this new employee is so valued to us day one. We're not going to make this an afterthought. So tell everybody a little bit about what you guys are doing, because I think it's super cool.
Sure. Appreciate that opportunity. And thank you for that segue to it. So we really hold that not normal part that you had mentioned in the introduction. We really take that serious around here. And so on every employee's first day, we actually have a video from their family or friends. And that's already one of the first emails that they'll receive as an employee here is from them, wishing them a great first day. And it usually ends up in tears between the manager that's showing it or the actual new employee that's watching it. And we get kids, dogs, neighbors involved, and it really shows. And quite honestly, I think at the very core and center of what's missing is, with all the technology and everything that we're doing to help enhance employee experiences, I think the human part is left out of it. And this is a great example with a little bit of effort on our part. No money, by the way, it doesn't cost anything, but we're reaching out to these family members and friends and collecting this video ahead of time, which they're now telling their friends and family, my husband or wife is going to work for this company, and guess what they do on the first day? We made this great video for him or her, and boy, you can imagine how well received it is.
That's pretty awesome. You say no money, but that sounds like a good amount of, work and coordination. How do you go about, it sounds like the candidate that or the new employee is pretty surprised when they see this video. How do you go behind them and get all these folks to get these videos to you? It's like coordinating a nice little surprise party or something.
That's exactly what it is, actually. And so, so as part of our onboarding, we have a digitized onboarding process, and we collect emergency contact information in that process.
Yeah.
And so we reach out to the emergency contact, and they are always welcome and open to doing it. But it is some logistics involved, and we do get some people who are not as savvy with the camera on their phone, but they get grandchildren or friends to help them sometimes and work through those logistics. And so so we always get it done in the end, but it definitely does require some time.
That's awesome. So a lot of companies, complain down the road, or, an executive gets upset because they're, measuring attrition and they have a high attrition rate, especially when we're talking about kind of frontline staff and so forth. What do you think are some of the key factors that are driving high attrition in organizations that really contribute to that?
Yeah, so I think there's two areas. One is in the recruitment process, and having a really open, honest recruitment process so that people really do know what they're getting in for.
Right.
What does a day in the life look like? Speak to other people who are doing the role. Talk to current managers. And so I think that we were worse at this in the past, and we've gotten better in trying to make sure that it's a match, right, for the values and the mission and the culture, and is that all going to be a fit, right? The whole interview process in my recruiting process, is it a fit for what they're trying to accomplish in their life and their goals and their career versus what the company needs, and making sure that that all aligns and matches. I think the second biggest area is the hiring manager experience, making sure that those managers are equipped with the right handbook and tools to be able to execute on not just meeting their business objectives, but really personalizing that employee and career experience here at Phenom, so that we're making sure that we're helping them grow, nurturing them toward their goals, while also driving the company goals and making sure that all aligns. That's where I think you really get to reduce that attrition rate.
So you made some great points, and I don't want to steal John's thunder for later in the show, but he's really turned his kind of recruiting organization upside down. To your point of it starts with the recruiting. How do you instill that with recruiters that historically, has been about how fast to fill a position and just, throwing candidates through a funnel. So they're measured on, filling that position. And now in some of these markets, or most of the markets, it's a candidate driven market, right? And the recruiter is now having to play more of this digital marketing kind of building relationship type role. And it's not as transactional as it used to be. So how do you within your team kind of make sure that your recruiters are on board with, really having that open, honest conversation that not all candidates are going to be a fit, and, being honest with candidates of the expectations and the work environment and career path versus painting everybody this just amazingly rosy picture of a work environment that makes them leave, after 90 days. How do you instill that within your team?
Yeah, so we measure our recruiters on how many employee engagement, right? So of the people that they brought through and have gotten hired, the 6-month mark is a significant milestone on our metrics. Everybody who stays for 6 months, we have like a 90% retention rate once you get over that 6-month mark. Within, to your point, the first 90 days, you lose some of those people, if it wasn't matched. And so by measuring our recruiters on those metrics, and we have about 20 data points that we use for employee engagement, whether they're using the benefits, have they referred a friend, do they have a friend at work? And so we've got, all these different data points that we analyze between that, and getting to the 6-month mark. That's how we measure our recruiters. And that allows them to have that upfront, honest conversation, because if they're not meeting those metrics, that's what they're going to be measured on. And so that gives them the incentive to have that upfront, honest conversation to make sure, because we all know that replacement is a lot more costly than getting that right. So I'd rather get it slower and get it right, which will cost us less money in the long run. And so by measuring the recruiters on those metrics is how we keep them honest on those conversations.
That's great. And it sounds like some of those points that you analyze, you've modified and kind of perfected or got, much better at that over time. Is that been a top-down approach from you guys' executive team? I mean, you're one of the co-founders, and is that something that you guys said, hey, we have to address this day one, and really looked at why employees, do leave? Because I don't care how good your company is, you're going to have people leave, right? And so is that, a lot of organizations, it's not really kind of a top-down initiative to really put those metrics into place day one. Just everybody gets upset, 6 months, 9 months down the road that, it's costing them X, right? So what's your advice to folks to really, does it need to be C-level down to really instill and look at the process and look at, like you guys have those data points? Is it something that HR leaders can do on their own without C-level buy-in? Where does that need to be within an organization?
Sure. Good question. So when I first started, we were looking at the typical recruiting metrics until I raised the question, well, why? Why do we care so much about time and cost per hire? And how do we define that really, right? Cost per hire, again, somebody who comes and leaves after 90 days, that cost per hire, I would argue, is way higher than, where we spent more money to get the person in the door because it took more time, and then they wound up staying for 9 months or a year, hitting those marks. That, cost per hire would be a lot less. So to answer your question, I don't think it has to come completely C-level down. Obviously, that always helps. But I think HR leaders are in a position where if they can make the business case, and as a co-founder, I have some financial acumen that others may not. And so I'm looking, how do I make this case to the CFO, right? How do I talk, when you talk finance and when you show actual cost per hire or cost, that savings with retention, that's when you get the command and respect of the finance department, which will help at the C-level, obviously, as well. And so I think that they can execute on their own and build a business case, but get C-level buy-in if they don't have it already. They can use finance to help do that.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. We actually had a podcast that we recorded a week or so ago about the difference in leaders versus managers. And I noticed that you said HR leaders several times. I think true HR leaders will lead that charge, whether they have buy-in or they don't buy in, right? But HR managers really aren't going to kind of stick their neck out there to create change, right?
I couldn't agree more. Yeah.
So I think that's a big difference that is interesting that keeps kind of coming up of this managers versus leaders. So Brad, last thing I want to talk about is we always ask folks on the show, what's really keeping them up at night. What's keeping you up at night in regards to, talent recruiting, hiring process that is either something that's kind of strategically you're thinking about for the rest of this year or next year, or something that's kind of causing you pain?
Sure. So I'm constantly worrying about, are we doing enough as an organization? Am I doing enough as a leader? Things like this to get thought leadership out there. But really, you hear about the upskilling problem that everybody's facing. And quite honestly, that's one of the bigger things that keeps me up at night. Are we providing an environment to help nurture people's skills and careers so that they have a path toward the future? And do we have the right mix of humans and technology? And again, that environment to make sure that people are able to get upskilled as quickly as possible. And quite honestly, I don't think anybody's doing it good enough or fast enough. And so that's one of the main things that keeps me up at night.
Yeah, and I think it's keeping a lot of HR leaders up at night, given you have, so many generations right now in the workforce, and with millennials, 75% within the next 5 months, and then you have Gen Zs that aren't going to college and coming directly into the workforce. You've got a lot of mix of personalities and how people want to learn and and you've got less tenure for younger demographics. So I think everybody's scratching their head and trying to solve the upskill training world peace right now.
Absolutely agreed.
Well, cool, Brad. Hey, it's been such a pleasure to have you on the show. Thanks for sharing all your great insights, and we'll continue to follow your guys' journey. Tell everybody where they can find you on social to stay connected.
Absolutely. PhenomPeople.com is the best way if you want to follow our company, and Brad Goldoor on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Thanks for being on the show, Brad.
Thanks for having me.
John, welcome to the show.
Hey, Carrie, how are you this Friday?
Great. Well, I want to talk a little bit. You've done some pretty cool stuff with your recruiting team and kind of really changed the model upside down to, instead of the traditional manners of, having recruiters be incentivized to, really around fill rate metrics, you've really changed that to really incentivize them on retention. Tell us a little bit about what led you to that, and then if you've seen any kind of change in results on really turning that upside down.
Yeah, I can tell you, my recruiting team didn't think it was too cool at first because, traditionally you don't have talent acquisition with any ownership of retention. And the reason that it became really important for me is, if you look at any statistics, overall unemployment is so low, but turnover keeps increasing. We're talking overall turnover. And specifically in some of the positions we recruit for, it was to the point where we're just like keeping pace. So, we can measure the traditional metrics and time to fill, those types of things, but that really wasn't helping the company. And I think out of no other reason than we need to try to do something. That was the impetus behind it, is we're going to take some ownership of this. So now there are, and granted, I had a false start on this. At first, I made it more of a penal type thing. If your people don't last at least, X amount of days, then you don't get a bonus for that. That didn't work as well. So I reshaped the program to give you an additional incentive if they make it to certain benchmarks. And that really took off. I think that when you change what you measure, you change what you get. And when we started to really put some incentives and some focus on let's keep these people around longer, the recruiting team they started recruiting differently. And you could tell that putting a butt in a chair was less important than I'm going to get the right person that's going to stick around because there's some additional incentive here for me.
No, that's great. And so did you have to change the actual, kind of hiring process in what questions those recruiters were asking up front, or was it driving them to make, harder decisions and not put people through the funnel, or were they asking different questions? Or tell us a little bit about that kind of change up front.
Sure. And that's what I was thinking going in is, all right, now we're going to have to actually really reshape the way that we screen people. But you know what? We didn't. What happened was, because recruiters are smart people, and if they know that, I need to take a little bit more time screening this candidate to make sure it's a fit. We throw that word around a lot, fit, but they really did start, making a more concerted effort to make sure somebody was a cultural fit, make sure that they had the right motivation to change jobs, and to make sure that, this was not just the candidate they got most recently and they could maybe get them hired real quickly. It might take a few extra days, but they would really make a concerted effort to find the right hire as opposed to the quick hire. And a lot of that they just did instinctively.
That's great. And you mentioned earlier, we always talk about how competitive the marketplace is in healthcare, and you being, in the healthcare industry, with the unemployment rate low, and then with your younger demographic, tenure just isn't what it used to be. Is this changing kind of for you, after the hiring process, with leadership development or, fit, allowing folks to go across different roles? Or are you starting to look at this, and how is that change kind of post getting them in the door to help retain them better?
Yeah, absolutely. Healthcare, maybe even more so than some other markets, but we recruit for some positions where the turnover rate might be below 1%. Not the turnover, the unemployment rate might be less than 1%. And so that the way you're recruiting is you're not necessarily getting the big bang for your buck by just blasting out job ads and hitting more job boards. You've got to be smarter about it. And if we looked at our statistics at the end of the year, 7 out of every 10 hires we made was somebody that we sourced. So we actually were proactively going after people that fit a profile rather than, post and pray. That's the big recruiting tagline. Well, we weren't, you can't count on that. You need to, the people that you're hiring are already working. They're working for somebody else. So there's a few things there. You're right. The demographic, that tenure is going down. And I think over the last 5 years, tenure's gone down like 30%. And at the same time, unemployment's gone down. Turnover's going up. So you can tell that what you have is a full-blown candidate-driven market. You have a candidate pool that is a little bit more entitled now because they know they have options. And I have this phrase I keep saying to my team, it's driving them crazy, is that we have to all be millennials now, because we know that one of the big things for millennials is to have a job with a purpose. So if we are not treating every recruiting interaction with a candidate as part of what we offer, is you're going to have a shared purpose. You're going to be collaborating with people who are like-minded, and there's an end result that we're all trying to achieve. We have to stress that more, because that has a lot more importance than maybe offering somebody 50 cents more an hour for some of these jobs. So we've had to really sell, some of these are these buzz terms, vision and, a purpose and things like that, but you really have to take some time and explain the why as opposed to the what.
Yeah, I think it's funny because we talk about that all the time. We actually just had a white paper come out about, how to recruit for a passive talent pool. And, going back to what you said on the post and pray and, sourcing your own candidates, I think a lot of folks really rely on that post and pray and pray because, you put a job out over a bunch of different job boards, and you're typically attracting what I like to call the underemployed and the unemployed, right? And those
Right.
are typically, people that aren't in that, top candidate pool that you're looking for. And so if you guys, are sourcing your own kind of 7 to 10 candidates, which is great numbers, you're doing a lot of relationship building to that passive pool that could be working, across the street at your competitor or whatever it may be. So from a recruiter standpoint, are you really honing in, to drive that retention and attrition numbers down, that a lot of that relationship building where you may not see, that fill rate today, the person may not be ready to leave their job today, but you're building a lot of these relationships and kind of building your own relationship funnel? I mean, is that how you guys have been looking at it? That you may not see today's kind of payoff from that, but you're seeing it in, the retention numbers?
Yeah, you know what? We have a program. So this is part of when we put the focus on retention. So if you're one of our recruiters and you're building that relationship up front, which they're doing a better job of now because they're looking for fit, and you get somebody hired, we actually have a program called Recruit Plus 90. Over the next 90 days, there's 3 or 4, depending on which level of position it is, there's 3 or 4 checkmark dates that our recruiters will send a text, or they will reach out via phone to the person they hired, just to take the temperature. How's it going? Is the job what you expected? And also to just maybe reestablish the fact that, I didn't forget you once you got hired. And if you remember, the recruiters are usually the first person that someone meets when they're on their way into a company, and usually the first person they trust. I mean, you're giving them advice that's going to help them make the career choice. So our people will touch base with them 3 or 4 times over the next 90 days. And we know how critical that time frame is, because that's when they're really onboarding and getting assimilated. And we've seen, our retention numbers have gone down, unemployed turnover has gone down about 12% in most of our key roles. And this is just after 3 months. So I'm, seeing the results immediately. And I can't imagine that's not going to continue to do so for a little while we establish this program. I think it's just, it's common sense to keep those relationships going after you hire them.
Right. No, that makes total sense. And what advice would you have to other HR leaders to not make retention and attrition and afterthought, what advice would you give them?
I'd say if you get what you measure, and if you're only measuring, if you're only competing to hire in a market, you're going to keep hiring, but all you're doing is replacing talent. Texans love a good expression, and ours is, you can't cool down the room if the windows are still open. So if you're not focusing on retaining your talent, then you're just doing half the job.
No, that makes total sense. No, great advice. So I always ask every HR leader, what's really the one or two things keeping them up at night in regards to either talent or, recruiting, retention, attrition, whatever it may be. What's keeping you up at night from that perspective?
You know what? Right now, the economy is so good. Job market is so good that these things are cyclical, and so you're kind of waiting. Well, what's going to happen when this thing levels off a little bit, or if we do have a dip? That's one thing, and then the other is realizing we're just in the beginning of this transition and how a workforce is shaped up. We think by 2025, 75% of the workforce is going to be millennials. So like them or not, here they come and they're taking over. So we need to start now on how we attract that workforce and how we retain them.
Don't forget our nice little Gen Zs that are already in the workforce as well. And if you read any of the numbers, with Gen Zs and millennials, I don't know if any of the other generations will be working if you believe any of the statistics.
Right, I know.
It's so crazy. Well, cool. Before we let you go off the show, John, I know you're working on a book, We're All Millennials. Can you give everybody just a little prelude of what to expect on that book you're working on?
Expect that a lot of this is just something that's been percolating in my brain over the last 6 months about how did we get here where we have a situation where people are staying for a shorter time frame, and they're doing it on their own volition. 50% of people are leaving their job within the first 6 months. That is crazy stuff. But I think that we can look back at how HR, well, not just HR, but corporations reacted to the recession in the late 2008, 2009, how we reacted there and what we did to the employees that were either laid off or retained, the way we reacted. I think we're paying for that now, because we changed the mindset of employees to where, we have to all think like millennials. It's not just enough to offer somebody a job. If you don't offer them a purpose, and if you don't offer them something that they can feel like they're a piece of, then we're going to keep this revolving door going. But I think there's some numbers that really speak loudly to why we got here and how we need to turn it around.
Well, awesome. Everybody click on the link in the show notes to follow John on LinkedIn. He is a contributor at several different HR publications and has some fun stuff going on. John, thanks so much for being on the show.
Hey, thank you, Carrie. It's my pleasure.
Well, great. This closes today's show. Feel free to share the HR love about retention and attrition. Share the show with your friends. Subscribe to get them delivered in your inbox or your podcast network of choice on a weekly basis. And thanks to our amazing guests today, Brad and John. It has been a great show. Till next week.
This podcast has come to a close. To hear more from the Executive Innovation Show podcast, subscribe, submit questions, and share the love. Follow us on social. We're everywhere.